Hello everybody, this is Dr. Fouladian. Today we're going to talk about the muscular tissue and nervous tissue. So let's start with the muscular tissue first. So as all the other tissues that we discussed before, the first thing is the main function of the tissue. Muscular tissue has the ability to contract and relax, means that has the ability to get shorter and then relax and get back to the original size that it has. So we have three types of muscle cell. You remember each tissue is composed of several cells that all together make a tissue and serve a specific function. We have different types of the cell, three types of muscle cell: skeletal muscle cell, cardiac muscle cell, and a smooth muscle cell. And each one of these are making their own tissue, muscle tissue. Therefore, we have a skeletal muscle tissue coming from a skeletal muscle cell. We have cardiac muscle tissue coming from the cardiac muscle cell, and we have a smooth muscle tissue that is coming from the smooth muscle cells. So, as we all had before, a group of muscle cells together make the muscle tissue, right? Now, muscle cells are different than the typical cell that we discussed. How? First, the shape is specifically long because it's like a cylinder, a very long cylinder, because as we are going to discuss about the function and all the other things that we have inside the cell, you will see that the cell is going to contract. The two ends are getting to get closer to each other, and for that reason, it has a cylindrical cylinder shape, right? So that's the first thing, and due to that reason, we call a muscle cell specifically as a muscle fiber. So from now, whenever you hear muscle fiber, simply means a muscle cell. Besides that one, we have some specific terms for the muscle cell that are slightly different from a typical cell. Like for example, the cytoplasm that we have inside of a cell, here we call it sarcoplasm. Sarco simply means flesh, meat, right? So here we call the cytoplasm as sarcoplasm for any of the muscle cells. Also, the plasmalemma that we had, you remember, plasma membrane, cell membrane is called plasmalemma, right? And here we call that plasma membrane or plasmalemma as sarcolemma. That's easy to remember, just add sarco for that, right? Now, the skeletal muscle cell, starting from the skeletal muscle cell, we talk about its characteristic shape and all the special features that it has. Then we go to the cardiac muscle cell and a smooth muscle cell. Pay attention that later for each specific part of the body that we go that are dealing with this type of the cells and tissue, you can refer back here and read them again, review them again, because we're not going to cover them again later. All right? So for the skeletal muscle cell, that sometimes, as we said, refers to it as a skeletal muscle fiber because of the long size of the long shape of the cells, that is a cylindrical or cylinder shape. Those muscle fibers or muscle cells, skeletal muscle cells, they are multinucleated. These are some of the specific cells of the body that we have more than one nucleus. The nuclei that we have here, they're just under the sarcolemma, means that they are located on the periphery of the cell compared to the normal typical cell that the cell is usually in the center of the cells, right? Then these cells are incapable of cell reproduction. They cannot divide and make another cell like themselves, right? But we have some myosatellite cells, some specific cells that can reproduce, and therefore muscle repair is become possible. But pay attention, these are stem cells that remain in between the muscle tissue, and whenever it is needed, they reproduce another cell to repair the tissue. So this is not that all the muscle cells can have this ability. These are specific cells, therefore we call them specifically myosatellite cells, and their function is specific as they can produce, they are stem cells and they can produce more muscles. And the other thing about the skeletal muscle cell, they have a striped appearance under the microscopes. When you look under the microscope, you see some lines. We call them striations. And due to that reason that they have these striations, all these lines in the muscle cell, we call these cells as striated muscles. And as they have a voluntary action, we call them striated voluntary muscles. And this definition specifically makes it clear that these striated voluntary muscles are skeletal muscle cells, to differentiate them from the cardiac muscle cell and from the smooth muscle cell, because as we are going to talk about those ones, we will see that the cardiac muscle cells are also striated, but they are not voluntary, they are involuntary. What does voluntary mean? Voluntary means that they are under our conscious control. As I explained here, these muscles, cells, and tissue, and finally muscles move the skeleton voluntarily. It means that we consciously decide that we want to move that part of the body. Therefore, these ones are following the conscious control. So the action is voluntary. So those are striated and they act voluntarily, and these are the muscles. So this serves exactly for the skeletal muscle cells. Pay attention, and sometimes in the slides of the lab you may see that some of them mistakenly have been labeled striated muscles to show for the skeletal muscle cell, but that is wrong, because as I mentioned right now, cardiac muscle cells are also striated. So if they want, instead of saying skeletal muscle cell, say something else, they can just say striated voluntary muscle, to be completely clear. Now, as we mentioned, a group of skeletal muscle cells, or as we mentioned, muscle fibers, they together make a skeletal muscle tissue. And over there you will see that all the cells are all in the same, they are all the same. A group of the cells all together back to back make a skeletal muscle tissue. And skeletal muscle tissues with other type of tissues together make the skeletal muscle. A skeletal muscle is an organ. Sorry about that. And you remember that each organ has a specific shape. That's due to that one we recognize it, and has a specific function, right? Here the function of a skeletal muscle is to contract and move the skeleton. And that's the reason we call it a skeletal muscle, because it is attached to a bone and to the skeletal system, and its function is to move the skeleton and helps the parts of the body to move. The example for that is, for example, the muscle that you have in front of the forearm, in the anterior side of, arm. In the anterior side of the arm, you have a muscle, we call it biceps brachii muscles, and that one is an organ, as an skeletal muscle, as an organ. I just want to emphasize this one to differentiate a skeletal muscle cell from a skeletal muscle tissue from the skeletal muscle as an organ. And all those skeletal muscles, all those organs, that each one has a name and has a shape and has a specific function, moves a specific part of body in a specific way, All those muscles are part of a system that we call it muscular system. So pay attention that the muscular system is composed of only a skeletal muscle, not the cardiac muscle and muscle tissue, not the cardiac, not the smooth muscle tissue. Only the skeletal muscles are making the muscular system. So that was a brief regarding the skeletal muscle. And here you see that each one of these, like this one, is a small part of a skeletal muscle cell. And if I want to show you the whole length, it might be about 200 times or more of this size. If you continue 200 times from the both sides, you can get actual size of the comparing to this part that is showing, right? That's 200 times more almost, just of an approximation. I just want to show you that this is a very tiny part of a long fiber of a muscle fiber. And here you see that this cell next to this cell, next to one, next to other, next to the other, all these ones together make a muscle tissue. So you're looking at a small portion of a skeletal muscle tissue. And here pay attention that each cell has more than one nucleus, so it's multinucleated, and the nuclei are located in the periphery of the cell. If you pay attention that this is like a cylinder, so this is located, all the nuclei are located in the periphery of the cell under the sarcolemma, the plasmalemma of the cell. And you see the seriation very clear, all these are seriation. And you see the cells are completely cylindrical, they are not branched, they're just one simple cylinder. And all these ones differentiate this one from the other types of the skeletal muscle cells and tissues. Now let's go to the cardiac muscles. Cardiac muscle cell, they found only in the heart. The only organ of the body that has cardiac muscle cell is the heart. Now let's see how these muscle cells, and following that the tissues that is making cardiac muscle tissue is different from the skeletal muscle cells and tissue. Here, each cardiac muscle cell has only one nucleus. Rarely it may have two, but usually it has only one, so it is not a multinucleated cell. Cells connected by intercalated disc. This intercalated disc, this is a place that actually, if I show you, this is one cell, end of one cell, right here. And this is the end of the other cell. When these two are connecting to each other, the plasma membrane that we have here and the one that we have here become thicker. Therefore, we see them as a disc. The border between the two cells, when they are connecting to each other, is called intercalated disc. And it is very important feature when you are looking under the microscope or look at the picture of a tissue of the cardiac muscle tissue to recognize this one. If you can see this one intercalated disc, you can say that this is a cardiac muscle tissue. If not, that might be hard to tell because there are many things that are common between the skeletal muscle tissue and cardiac muscle tissue, and sometimes may be difficult without seeing intercalated disc. Might be very difficult to say that it is skeletal muscle tissue or cardiac muscle tissue. Now, these cells have a pulsating contractions, means that they periodically pulsing and they contract and relax because they have some pacing. They have the ability that they have a pacemaker cells. They are pacemaker cells that they are contracting on their own. They have an innate ability to contract by themselves. In other words, they do not need external triggers or signals or a nerve to come to them, or a chemical integration that poke them and say, okay, now it's time to contract, right? So innately they having a pace and they contracting according to that pace. So that is the things that is only applies to the cardiac muscles. And as we said, these are striated the same way that the skeletal muscles are striated. They have a striation, those lines that we call them striation, but they are involuntary. Thanks God they don't wait for us to decide that the heart beats or not, right? They just do their job by themselves without being waiting for anybody to tell them anything, right? So those are striated involuntary muscle, and that's how we differentiate them from the skeletal muscle that are striated voluntary muscle. These cardiac muscle cells are branched. So that's the thing that is different from the skeletal muscle, because he said that the skeletal muscles, they have no branch, they're just a simple cylinder, but these are not, although they are long, not as long as the skeletal muscles though, but they are branched. And this is an important distinction from the skeletal muscle fiber. So these are all the things that you need to differentiate between the cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle and know about it. Now again, a group of cardiac muscle cells or cardiac muscle fibers together make the cardiac muscle tissue. And again, here the cells are all the same. A group of them together attach to each other and make the tissue. Now the cardiac muscle tissue with other types of the tissue make heart. So heart is the only organ of the body that it has the cardiac muscle tissue in it. Pay attention. The heart by itself is an organ. It is not that it has only cardiac muscle tissue, right? It has some connective tissue connecting different parts to each other. It has some epithelial tissue, like inside of the cavities of the heart is lined with the epithelial tissue. It has nervous tissue that comes into that. So all these ones together make an organ, different types of the tissue. But the muscle tissue that we have over there is cardiac muscle tissue. And heart by itself as an organ is part of a system that we call it cardiovascular system that circulates the blood throughout the body. And here you see the picture of the cardiac muscle tissue. If you pay attention, you want to see one single cell. You can see part of one cell, like here you see that it is the border between the cell. That's the one that we call it intercalated disc, or this one, or this one, or this one, or this one, right? You see that the cells are cylindrical, but they are branched. Like for example here, you will see, may not very clear here, but maybe over the slides you will see that, like for example, I cannot show that here, but this is that, like you have one part here, then these two get branched, like become Y-shaped, like that, right? So that's the one that they are branched. You see that in the middle of each cell you have a nucleus. This is only one, as I said, maximum two, and they are located in the center of the cell, not on the periphery of the cell. And these are all the things that help to differentiate them from other types of the muscle cells, and pay attention that these cells are striated. And the third type of the skeletal muscle cell are smooth. The third type of the muscle cells are smooth muscle cells. And these muscle cells, the smooth muscle cells, can be found in many areas of the body. Like for example, at the base of the hair. hair has a follicle, we call it hair follicle at the very base when it goes into the skin. At the base of that, we have a tiny muscle that is attached with that, and that is the smooth muscle. In the wall of the blood vessels, they are all smooth muscle. Those blood vessels, smooth muscle is like any other muscle, it can contract and make movement, right? So those muscles that are located circular around the lumen of the vessel, when they contract, make the lumen get smaller, therefore they push the blood inside of that. Or they may be around the lumen of the small intestine. When they contract, they make it move. When they relax, they make it more space inside, and that's the way that the material inside of the small intestine or large intestine or any other part of the digestive system can work. The same way in the urinary system, like for example around the ureter that we have, around the urinary bladder, all those ones, when they contract, those muscles they contract, they make one part of the body to move, right? Or in the respiratory system, or in the circulatory system, digestive system, reproductive system. As you see, we have smooth muscle all over the body. Any organ that you have inside of the body, if you remember, we call them viscera. All those organs, except lung, when they have a muscle, it is a smooth muscle, as a general rule. The skeletal muscles are outside, attaching to the bones. Inside of the body, we have cardiac muscle for the heart. We have a smooth muscle for all the other muscles inside of the body. These muscles are capable of cell reproduction, at least some part of them, some types of them, and they have a spindle shape, and they have two tapered ends, right? And these are not striated, we call it non-striated, and they are not voluntary. These are involuntary muscles. So therefore, can be distinguished from the two other types of the muscle cells very easily. Non-striated, involuntary muscles, and they have, because involuntary contraction, like inside of the body, you don't decide that your small intestine moves, or large intestine move, or this or that, or uterus contract, or that, all those ones. So we're talking about the involuntary and smooth muscle parts. And the group of the smooth muscle cells again, or smooth muscle fiber, together make the smooth muscle tissue. And here again, all the cells are similar and all together make a tissue. Now, as we discussed, this muscle tissue, smooth muscle tissue, can be found in many internal organs, for example, uterus, urinary bladder, small intestine, so and so much more, all of all the internal organs. And these organs belong to different systems of the body. Uterus, for example, is in the female reproductive system, urinary bladder in the urinary system, a small intestine in a digestive system, and all those ones. When we go over the system, one by one, we will learn about all the organs that belongs to each system. But whenever over there we talk about a muscle, other than the heart, we are talking about a smooth muscle. Smooth muscle cells and smooth muscle tissue. And here you see the smooth muscle tissue here, and if you want to see only one single cells, if I want to show you, like here you see this border that the taper end, if I continue to show the whole muscle cell, will be like this size. As you see, those are not very long, they are a spindle shape, they have one single nucleus that is located inside of the cells, not in the periphery, and all of them are in the same shape all together. They're making a tissue that under microscope you see them like here. And as you know, under the microscope you may not see the exact border of the cells. So you see a red background with just some nuclei around, and barely you can see the spindle shape of the cell just in very few locations, but generally is a complete homogeneous background that you see the nuclei on that. You recognize them from the location that where in the organ that you are looking at that is located. Like for example, whenever you have a tube, in the center you have epithelial tissue, around that you have some connective tissue, and around that you have a muscle tissue. And those muscle tissues are a small muscle tissue. So that's just a brief about all we discussed about the three types of the muscle tissue that we have: skeletal muscle tissue that pulls on skeletal bones, and they are voluntary, they make the voluntary contraction. The cardiac muscle that contracts the heart and it has the rhythmic contractions by itself, and a smooth muscle that pushes fluid and solids along the digestive tract, for example, and all the other. It does one type of movement in every organ and every system of the body, and they are involuntary, they're making involuntary contractions. So that was regarding of the muscle tissues, three different types of the muscle tissues that come from different types of the muscle cells, and how they are taking part to make the different organs and which systems of the body generally they belong to. So when we get to the skeletal muscle tissue that we are going to talk in the muscular system, or when we are going to go to the heart in the cardiovascular system, or when we are going to go over any other part of the body that you see the smooth muscles, over there we are not going over these details anymore. You can come back here and review them again. So let's continue with the nervous tissue. That is the last tissue that we're going to discuss. It's part of the four main categories of the tissue. So far we talked about the epithelial tissue, about the connective tissue, about the muscular tissue, and this is the last one, nervous tissue, that we're going to talk about briefly. So nervous tissue, generally, for the function of that, that's the tissue that is specialized to conduct electrical signals through the body. It's like a wiring system of all the body, like that. When you have a wiring that connects a switch to the lamp, right? It's something like that, that you have it, that you send a signal from one corner and goes all the way and reaches another corner of the body, right? And these are all done by the electrical signals, right? And the way that it works, that different patterns and frequency of those electrical signals, that we call them electrical impulses, or specifically we call them action potentials. So those signals, the frequency of them and the patterns of them, that they are different, determines function of the nervous system. How this signal is different and the other one, and all those things, right? And end up to the different actions. In general, in the nervous tissue, we have two types of the neural cells. So two types of the cells are making neural tissue. The first ones are called neurons, but sometimes they're called nerve cells. So nerve cells are other name for the neurons. Pay attention, these are nerve cells, because later you will see that we may have a nerve fiber. That's a specific part of the neuron, but here we're referring to the whole cell as the nerve cell. The other type of the cells, neural cells, are called neuroglia. Neuroglia and neurons. Now let's see how these two are different. So for the two types of the cell that we have in the neural tissue, neurons are the ones that or the nerve cells, as we name them too, are the cells that are actually responsible for the transfer and processing of information in the nervous system. These are the ones that actually doing the job of transferring the signal, right? Those are the signaling cells, the wires that we have between the different parts of the body and send signal from one corner to another corner of the body, right? Those are neurons. And they have some parts including soma, that we will call them cell body, axon, and dendrites. We will see all these ones over the picture and we will discuss about them. And we have some characteristics for the neurons that differentiate them from the other cells. They are the longest cells in the body. Sometimes they reach to like about 1 meter, like from one part of the brain or one part of the spinal cord all the way. For example, might go all the way like from lower back, lower part of back, go all the way to the big toe, for example, right? So it might be about 1 meter long. Those are the longest cells in the body. And important thing, that they are incapable of cell reproduction. Therefore, if a neuron dies, it cannot be replaced. But if it's cut or an injury happens, they have a limited ability of repair, that under very specific circumstances they can be repaired. So, but know that they are incapable of reproduction, they cannot divide. So that was regarding neurons. Now the other type of cells that we have in the nervous tissue or neural tissue, they are called neuroglia. Neuroglia are, we have several types of the neuroglia, and all of them generally their function is supporting and protecting the neurons. They provide immunity for them, they provide nutrition for them, they provide supporting, cushioning, and many other things for them. And many types of the support that we're going to talk about them when we get going to chapter 13, that is about the neural tissue, and over there we go over more details of all these ones, right? But generally, they're protecting and supporting the neurons. Their size is smaller than the neuron, but their number is much more than neurons. They're almost 5 times of the number of the neurons in the neural tissue. But the thing is that they retain the ability to divide. They can divide and provide more of themselves, right? That's the things that is different with the neurons. Now here we're going over the structure of the neuron, but we're talking about the neuroglia later when we go to the later chapters. A neuron consists of some parts that just have been written here, like dendrites. We have soma or cell body. We have a long process, we call it axon or nerve fiber. The initial part of that is initial segment. The first part of the axon is called initial segment. And that initial segment is connected to the cell body through the axon hillock, right? Then we have, at the end of the axon, we have telodendria. And at the end of the telodendria, we have terminal buttons or axon terminals. Now let's talk about each one of them in more detail. Here you see the picture of a neuron. That you see that you have a cell body here. or soma, we call it soma. Soma means body, right? So that's another name for the cell body of an organ. You see that we have some dendrites, like here, 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 all dendrites, and pay attention that each dendrite has some spikes. All this is fine branching here around. So we call it, and here you have the axons, one single axons here, that at the end it makes all those branches, telodendrite, and at the end of them each one has the axon terminal. Now, if you want to go over more detail over each one of these, dendrites are neural processes that are specialized to respond to a specific stimuli in the extracellular environment that coming toward the cell body. They have dendritic spines, as I showed you, and they receive incoming messages from around, like for example from the chemical environment around them or from another neurons, for example. And these are stimulated by the environmental changes or the activities of other cells, like for example other neurons. So those are dendrites that are receiving the message. Then those come to the cell body or soma, that contains cytoplasm inside and also some organelles. Those organelles that we have in a soma or cell body include the nucleolus. We have mitochondria because there are lots of energy that is needed to provide energy for all those movements that is going to be done from one end to the other end. We have ribosomes here. We have a specific structure here we call the micelle bodies or chromatophilic substances. Chromatophilic means they love they love all those colors and dyes and all this. And which are clusters? Those are clusters of rough endoplasmic reticulum and three ribosomes together that we can see under the microscope. They become visible. And we have other organelles like Golgi apparatus, like other cells, and neurofilament. Those are specific filaments, part of the cytoskeleton, specifically in the neuron. We call them neurofilaments. And also some inclusion. So these are the things that we have inside of the cell body. So if you look at here, first you see the dendrites. These are dendrites, and all those dendritic spines are here. Then you have the cell body here. Inside you see nucleus and nucleolus. You see the micelle bodies here that can be seen as some clumps that are a collection of the rough endoplasmic reticulum with the ribosomes over there. And also those are the ones that we call it chromatophilic substances here. The other things haven't been shown here, but we have like Golgi apparatus. You see the neurofilaments, here. And then after that we have the axon. So as I have this picture, let me show you the axon hillock that is located here, that connecting the cell body to the axon. The first part of the axon here is called initial segment. Haven't been mentioned here, but you have it on the next pictures here. And then after that you have axon that get the signal and get it to the end here. And at the end you have all those branching. And at the end you have those axonal terminals or nodes that transferring the signals. So continuing all those description, axon hillock connects the initial segment to the cell body, and initial segment is the base of the axon, the initial part of the axon. The axons are long cytoplasmic processes, and usually it's only one per neuron, and conduct outgoing messages. So the message that is in the cell body is conducted outside through the axons. conduct nerve impulse or action potential toward the end that makes a synapse. Synaptic terminals over there. Synapse is a connection between one membrane to another membrane that connecting two parts together, right? Connecting the end of this neuron, for example, to a muscle cell or to another neuron, for example, or to a gland. Then at the end of the axon, you have all those terminal extension, branching of the axon, telodendria we call them. And then at the end of each one of those, we have axon terminal or terminal buttons. That those are the places that the neuron contacts another neuron or an effector organ that might be a muscle or a gland. And those are that the synapses, this is the place that the synapse is done. Synapses is done between the axon terminal and those cells, neuron cells, muscle cell, or gland cells. And here you see again all those things, and here you see the axon, hillock, and initial segment. You have in this picture two axon, hillock, and initial segment, and then at the end the axons, they make all those telodendria, all these ones, and at the end of each one you have axon terminal or terminal button, that is making a synapse in this place, for example, or this place, or this place, or this, any of these ones, with another cell that here might, as you see, might be a cell body or dendrite of the another neuron. So that was the end of the chapter. For the chapter 3, we covered all 4 types of the tissues, and later after this, so far we talked about the cells, we talked about the tissues. Now we are going to review the systems one by one, and in each system we are going to talk about the organs that we have, and when we're talking about the organs, we get back to again to the level of organization, what type of tissue are making that organ, and if there is a specific type of the cells that we haven't talked so far, we are going to talk about them in detail over there too. So have a wonderful time to the next chapter.